signatures. And if we collect enough signatures, there will be a plebiscite. And if the people's vote is in favor of the bill, then it will be put into law. And the pilot will not start earlier than 2025. So we have the opportunity to learn a lot from your pilot, because your pilot, I think the baseline questionnaire and also the first questionnaire will already be conducted before our pilot starts. And I think it's very interesting not just to repeat the same questions over and over again in any pilot, but to ask yourselves which questions have already been answered, what do we already know about basic income, and what are the new questions that we can answer with this specific pilot. Because in a scientific study, it's always like that the better you focus your questions, the better the results will be. If you try to find out everything, you will find out nothing. But when you have a sharp focus and you are interested in specific questions, there's a bigger chance that you really find evidence about specific questions. And one of our questions that is interesting to us is also what you said. We want to know, what does basic income make with a group of people that lives together? So that's why we are also proposing to have a certain a set of streets in Berlin where 3,500 people live together will get the universal basic income as a saturated study in this area, and including also people, homeless people who are living in that area. So everybody who has their residence or their normal place where they are living at the time when the pilot starts in that area will receive the basic income. And the control group can be the rest of Berlin, because it's everybody who doesn't get the basic income. So I think that's the main similarity between the two pilots. And the main difference is, I think, actually the way how we try to implement it, and that we still have a long democratic way ahead of us to get the people's vote, and we are not sure if we will get it.
Well, I'll just we'll get Bernhard Neumerk into the discussion. If you look from an academic perspective, what are your biggest hopes that you have for the two pilots? Like, what are the things that you think the two pilots could add to the academic discussion that we have around universal basic income?
So the first thing, thank you. The first thing was very often mentioned now. This is the question of implementation in itself by such a process. Yeah, and to see differences, for example, in the German case, the campaigning via an amendment, yes, versus political, say, top-down implementation, also how to organize the experiment, if you want to say this, or the pilot in itself. Yeah, in the end, what is very important for research is really to produce data. You said it more or less implicitly. That is very important with the questions. Yes, qualitative research and also quantitative research, to have a good foundation to see how these individuals in these pilots behave. If they behave under an environment in Catalonia different from that environment in Berlin. Then what is also very important, and that's my last thing, because I see that it is a good thing and a very important thing that you do it on the level of communities. Yeah, I'm very convinced that this way is, especially when you have direct democracy implementation strategies or possibilities, a good way, because the national state is very, very difficult to say, to convince in doing such an experiment. Yeah, but if a community sees and is convinced, the citizens as well as the politicians, that they could have some advantages, yeah, protocoled and documented in pilots like this, then they will say, okay, this is a good thing for us. We would like to proceed with it up to the end of the implementation, as long as we can do it in a community or in a state of a nation. And that might be very important, because this is the parallel line of political top-down to the idea that basic income arises out of the civic society, that it is a top-down project in itself and not a bottom-up project in itself and not a top-down project. Okay, bottom-up is very important. So therefore, I embrace both approaches here with the difficult cultures and background, as well as the difficult political institution under which they have to manage it.
Thank you very much. Oscar, what would you say, like, your party tries to integrate like the European level into national politics, and now we've got this kind of national or state level pilots going on. And what do you think, what does it mean for Europe as a total, that we actually have these two projects on the horizon now in Europe?
Yeah, I think it's important for Europe to have it in different countries and also localities, because like the structures in the cities or in the countries are different. So when we want to be one Europe and make European politics with that and align, for example, social security, we need the different data and different results for studies like that. To say, like in Spain, maybe we have to look at that law, we can adapt it with that. Then we can use the best practice for Berlin, for example, or for Amsterdam. Say like it works like that in that town, and when we change it to our structure and also legal basic, let's say it like that, then it could be really useful for the European Union.
Thank you so much. And we already talked about a little bit kind of like what could be the things that the two pilots could add kind of to the discussion, or why do we need these two pilots now? That's also often a question that's been asked. And we already talked a little bit about what kind of is new about this two project that they have in common. And I would like to ask you, Aida, kind of when you looked into what things that you want to actually do research on, kind of like, what is it that we still want more insight on in the whole universe of kind of universal basic income? What is it that you want to add with your project that you're starting?
First of all, although we already know some effects on the individual level that we are still interested on, like poverty effects, consumption effects, labor market participation, we already know that. But there's a difference in our pilot plan that's why we also want to assess those, and that's the amount of the money that will be given, because when you approach the amount of the UBI to the poverty threshold, you are virtually eliminating poverty. So that's interesting to look at. And also looking at it in a community level with the two municipalities, as I said, gives us the chance to assess what happens with the aggregate demand on social services, public health services, maybe mental health services. So we have the opportunity to look at these kind of things. And also on the part of the RCT that we are targeting households and not individuals, we will be looking at intra-household relationships that we still have very little empirical evidence on that.
Anyone wants to add to that? Maybe Neumarker, do you want to add anything to the question of kind of what are the research questions that are kind of not so well researched until now?
Yeah, I think since many years there is the discussion, you raised here between the individual perspective and the perspective of the household. And indeed, I guess the household perspective is very important, because there we have persons who live together and manage it under a real life situation. Yes, no individual is isolated. So therefore, it's very interesting, because the household traditions, for example, in Spain and in Germany, in other countries, might be totally different. So even if you say the individuals are, from an economic point of view, in the same situation, they may adjust to a basic income differently. And it would be very interesting to see it, because that's very important for that, what you said, targeting. Yeah, is it fighting poverty, or would you like to address inequality arguments? Yes, or is it a new digitalization movement? We have a lot of things on which basic income could be very important. And I guess both, as far as I see it, both pilots can manage it that in a way that they get the experience. This means that you do not only work with propositions or hypotheses, but that you get from the reports what the most important things are. Yes, and this let the academic and the science restructure the thing. Yeah, what is common ground? What is universal? What is universal, and what is, say, country specific? That's very important because we have many common interests, but the degree and the intensity of the common interests and the different interests have to be measured over different countries. Because if we don't do that, then every government can only say, oh, from this pilot, we know that this is not very important and does not function, but it may function in another country. Yeah. So therefore, it's very important that we work together in a network. And I see it's very good that here we have some first integration of two pilots, yeah, for the next steps. That's very important, yeah, to have the scientific viewpoint of the overall goals and of the targeting.
So we already heard kind of like what are the cornerstones of the project in Barcelona. Joy, could you tell us a little bit more about kind of what the exact plans in Berlin are here? Like what kind of number of people and kind of how the research plan looks like?
Sure. The Berlin experiment would take place for 3 years. So I heard that your experiment is planned for 2 years. I think that we try to find a sweet spot between a very lengthy project. For sure, the ideal pilot for basic income would be just to implement it forever and then see the results. But that's not a pilot anymore because you want to have results after some time and then make a political process and decision-making process out of it. So make some political decisions out of it. So you always have to somehow set a time frame where you have the pilot conducted so you get results after some time. So we also make it for several years. The threshold is also the so-called Armutsrisikogrenze. So it's the, I don't know exactly if that's in your pilot, that would be interesting. There's two definitions of poverty. There's the relative poverty and the absolute poverty. So the level that we are planning in for Berlin is the relative poverty level, which is higher than the absolute poverty level. So for the audience, to explain it shortly, the absolute poverty level is the minimum that you need not to, let's say it easily, not to starve. And the relative poverty is a measurement where compared to the people around you, you have a certain amount to be able to take part in society and not to fall too far from the median. So for the average, from the average amount of money that everybody around you has for their use at hand. And that's also puts some light on why it's very important for us to have this community that really receives the basic income, similar to your proposal, because we know a lot about how individuals behave under a treatment of basic income. But as we know, happiness and being, if we are content or not with our lives, depends a lot of how we compare ourselves with the surrounding, with the people around us. And that's why I think it's very important that you give a whole community the access to basic income. And also, I think it would be interesting. So in our bill, we do not write exactly what the scientific questions to be answered need to be, but we more said that it needs some boundaries and some layout, what aspects of science has to be touched. So it is about decision making. It's also about the economic questions, but also about the individual questions about psychological health and physical health, but also questions about, for example, democratic involvement of people. So are people who receive the basic income more likely to do some care work for their communities, do some, how do they contribute to their society? Are they more likely or less likely to vote far right parties, for example? Do they more likely go to the polls in elections? And I think from my perspective, it will be very interesting also to collect some data that you cannot collect on the individual level. For example, how many waste do you find in the streets of the areas where the basic income is put out? Or if all the people in the area go to a certain elementary school, are the grades different from the people? Or for example, how many incidents of violence within the households between the households members towards children are reported in that certain area in that time? Things that you really not normally can ask by a survey. Most people would not answer how many incidents of violence within the household happened within the last 2 years. But you have this data on an anonymous level if you know that the whole area is receiving the basic income, and you know within a certain area how many incidents are reported to the authorities. And so it would be very interesting to know if this increases or decreases, and if you find some aspects on the community level that you could not find if you would just give the basic income to individuals.
A lot of similarities in kind of what the research topics should be. I've got one question, maybe also to see what it does with Europe, that they're also kind of, if you look at the amount of money that should be handed out, I mean, there's a difference between the pilots, and maybe that question goes into your direction, Oscar, because your party is one of the parties that actually supports the idea of universal basic income. And how can these pilots actually inform policy making? And are there any chances that on the European level we could actually agree on kind of having a shared idea of universal basic income? Do you see a way there? And are there any things on the European level that already take place?
Yeah, I think there's a way to get a European idea of it.
Maybe you need to speak up a little.
Yeah, I think it's important that we have like the different pilot programs in different localities, so we can say, hey, it works like that in Spain, like that in Berlin, find a common ground what we're talking about and what's going on. And then I think it's also possible from the European level. We propose that financing that, for example, the regional development fund, because it's always a big question, like how do we finance that? So that would be a possibility. And I think also like the change in industries to artificial intelligence, it's really important to think about a new social security program or system. And I think UBI would be a possibility.
To integrate the different perspectives and kind of form one European way of having social. Interesting. Yeah, thank you. I'll also start to integrate the questions that have been sent to us via the chat or in front of this event. So I think the first question that we got in is actually directed to you, Aida. There was a question kind of like, how is the pilot actually constructed to ensure that it's really going to be carried out until the end, and then and how it is actually financed, because there have been before pilots that actually didn't work until the end. So it's a big question. Or
one of the things that are different in our pilot plan is that it's fully funded by the government. It began from it came from a government agreement. So one party that it's not in the coalition government, but their votes were needed in order to form the government. They wanted to Catalonia to have a pilot plan on basic income, and that's the agreement that they arrived on. So our funding will come from public funds, and it's another line on the budget, on the yearly budget. So that's one assurance on being able to pursue and to finish the pilot plan. And another one is that the pilot plan, it's been 1 year for the design and 2 years for the implementation, and it lasts as long as the incumbency lasts. So in theory, if there are not elections or something really strange happens, we will be able to conduct the entire pilot plan.
It's actually for us in Germany quite hopeful to see that actually the government kind of does it on their own during this whole process of kind of like doing this very long direct democracy process. And in Catalonia, it's just happening like that. It's very promising to actually see.
Well, I mean, it's happening like that. It comes from a political sphere, but it's not like an independent political desire. It also comes from a really, I would say, horizontal public opinion desire, because specifically in the COVID pandemic crisis, there were so many manifestos coming from different groups like LGBTQ plus organizations or feminist organizations, education associations. So different groups from different profiles. They were all, a lot of them, they were writing manifestos for the UBI. So it's a top-bottom decision, but it also comes from a desire from the bottom.
Yeah, I think one of the questions also pointed a little bit into this direction, because there was a question kind of like, do you cooperate with some groups? Is kind of like, how is the situation in Catalonia and Spain towards universal basic income? And also one question was if actually the Catholic Church supports the idea of this pilot.
Yeah, to begin with this question, I wouldn't say that we are cooperating with the Catholic Church or any group in particular. We are an office that is open to any group that wants to support the UBI or wants to give advisement on how the UBI pilot plan is being designed. So basically, I wouldn't say that the office is piloting towards some groups in particular, but anyone who is open to the idea of UBI is welcome. And actually, the head of our office regularly meets with groups of any kind in order to also include in our pilot plan some particular demands, like maybe, oh, you should focus on agriculture because there's a problem in rural areas, or you should focus also on education. So we are not like focusing on one group or one specific topic, but we try to include almost any topic that comes to us in this sense.
Okay. There's also one question from the audience that is kind of regularly asked, and it's kind of this question: what will the universal basic income actually do about the situation that we already lack workforce, and that there are a lot of jobs that can't be filled? At least it's in Germany, the situation. Maybe you can also give the Catalan perspective afterwards. And this kind of topic also points at especially, for example, at the care sector, where people are normally poorly paid. And is there already some research on kind of in the international pilots that could hint us at this? Maybe I'll give this question first of all to you, Bernhard Neumerk, and if you want to add something, please feel free to add.
Yeah, one specific aspect concerning this question is, and this is highly controversial, discussed in science, is what are individuals doing, when they receive a basic income, and they would like to work, Do they work for very low wages because they can add it up, or are they so autonomous that they say, now we have to be really paid for it, So the idea behind that is, and I will do some research on it with Jürgen de Wispelar in the next year, is how do individuals use this, so to speak, outside option, out of the labor market, where they can do their work unpaid, or they can call it leisure, or they can say with a little upgrade, I will do it or they can say, I will return to the labor market only if you pay me quite good. Yes, this is an autonomous decision making, and I am sure this will make the labor market work better. Yeah, and this is very important. Yeah, and from that point of view, we will see that not only labor demanders, this means firms, yeah, will then say we have a lack in some labor, some work, but also the receivers of the basic income, the individuals, the labor suppliers, may say we will work for that and that. Yeah, and in the end, this really, I would not say revolutionizes, but it changes the market economy completely. Because if you are an entrepreneur and you say, I will not find people who work for me, then it may depend on that the individuals do what they want without your wages, yeah, or you have to pay them higher wages. Yeah, this means not necessarily that the individuals are not there. We know that labor usually is a scarce resource, but that the distribution of labor is different. And that's what we have learned now from the Corona crisis. That's highly productive for the basic income movement. Then in the Corona crisis, individuals decide now differently to decide where they work, where they would like to receive income, and so on and so forth. And this mobility makes it more different more difficult for entrepreneurs to find always the individuals who work for them, because the stigmatization of the workfare system, just like the Hartz-IV system, might be over. So therefore, my question is not, do we have a lag? Yeah, do we have a lag in finding work? Finding employees. The problem is, how do we attract them? And that's what is a very important part of new work, very dependent, I would say, on basic income. And basic income helps in restructuring it. So therefore, I would say the question is old-fashioned, assuming that the entrepreneur always have to say, we would like to hire you and you would not like to work for us. You are the problem. I would say, no, the entrepreneurs might be the problem. And you see, basic income changes the game dramatically in labor markets. So we need new organization of labor markets and asking questions of labor markets with new questions and not say the old questions. Why do we not find this persons or these persons? Labor demand is only one thing, but labor supply, and this means voluntary labor supply based on basic income, based on the outside option, basic income is the other question. And that's really new. And we have to investigate it. No one knows how this works, but we will see that individuals without capital, without a capital stock, may become more autonomous. And this enriches the society really very much.
Thank you very much. Anyone wants to add to this question?
Well, I couldn't agree more with what you said. And also, there's like a moral argument or subjective argument on the effect in the labor market participation with the UBI pilot plans regarding the argument that, what if people leave their jobs? But when we are speaking about really precarious labor markets, such as the Spanish one in general, but most of it care workers or jobs like that, well, maybe finding a negative effect on labor participation with the UBI pilot, it's not like a negative thing to be seen, because that would be maybe like what happened in the US some months ago. Because if you have more money short, you have more bargaining power, so you can choose more freely what conditions you can work for, or what conditions are too precarious for you to accept them.
Thank you very much. You already, like, in preparation of this event, you talked a little bit also about the situation in Spain in general, like what social systems you have at play at the moment and what it does to people in regards of like finding jobs, accepting them. Maybe you can give us a little bit of insight how the system in Catalonia is at the moment and what it does, like maybe also with the social welfare system.
Yeah, well, Spain, it's inequality. It's really characterizing the situation in Spain nowadays, especially after the pandemic crisis. And what it's, for example, some extra information, it's the 5th most unequal country in the European Union. And what we are seeing with the data is that even though the inequality is increasing across the last years, it's getting more and more difficult to decrease it through social transfers. For example, I would say that in Spain and Catalonia, because some of these social benefits are similar, are shared, I would say that we have two main problems. One of them is the lack of coverage, because two of the main social benefits in Catalonia are the IMV and the RGC. The IMV only arrives to 19% of people that are considered to be in severe poverty in Catalonia. So 80% of people in severe poverty are left behind with this social benefit. The other benefit, the RGC, covers more people, but it only covers 28% of people in severe poverty in Catalonia. So that's obviously one problem, that as policies that are targeting poverty, they are not arriving to the people that should be getting them. And another problem is the amount of money. Either the IMV or the RGC, they're not higher than 600 euros a month, while the poverty threshold in Spain is almost 800 euros a month for a single adult. So you don't even get out of poverty when you get these social transfers. So also the poverty trap that I think that happens with, I would say, almost any traditional social benefits. I would say maybe in Germany too, because they are almost always linked to being unemployed. So if you have been working hard, getting all the documentations for 4 months, let's say, to get one of the social benefits, and then they said, okay, do you want to get this job that, for example, in Catalonia or Spain, there are a lot of jobs that are temporary. Maybe you don't want to take that risk, not because you don't want to work, but because you don't want to risk the material needs that you are more or less covering with the social benefits in order to have a 2 or 3 months job. So yeah, I could go on, but I would say that these 3 aspects are the more problematic that we are facing.
Thank you very much. Do you want to do that or no? Maybe then I'll just also say to the audience, if you want to place more questions, please feel free. We definitely have time if you want to ask more questions. I think there's one coming in, but maybe I'll just point the next question to you, Joy. So the plan in the Berlin pilot is to actually also test different variations of universal basic income. Why is that the case, and kind of like what do you want to find out doing that?
Yeah, thank you. The idea behind that rationale is there have been a lot of experiments around the globe, starting in the 60s in Canada and the US, and now in the last years in Finland, also in Namibia, there will be one in India, there's one in Kenya. So actually, the question, is basic income something where a community could benefit from, is answered a lot and over and over again. And yes, every community that received basic income within a pilot actually benefited from that. So we thought the scientific view on basic income could go one step further and say, what kind of implementation of basic income has what kind of effects on the decisions of the people, on the welfare. So if you give people a different level of basic income, what does 100 euros more or less make of a difference? Or also the other question of taxation, because you always have to combine when you really want to implement basic income, not just in a pilot where you can just use a pile of money and distribute it amongst people, but when you want to distribute it amongst a whole national community, a federal community, or around the world, then you always have to ask yourself also, who does, where does the money come from that will be handed out to the people if everybody gets it? So, and for me, the most interesting aspect of basic income is that for many decades now, we have this idea that there is an economic sector, and in the economic sector, we have the enterprises, the companies, the entrepreneurs, and they are taking care of the money to provide labor and to hand out money for all the families of employees who work for this company. So it's like every company takes care, like in the older days, every company takes care of their employees and the families of those employees. But with basic income, there's a paradigm shift that we say, we as a community take care of the basic needs of everybody, and independent whether they are pursuing labor at a certain point, or if they're doing care work, if they're doing nothing, if they're educating themselves. But for sure, still the money has to be raised somewhere, and it still will be the economic sector, but not like separated. Every company provides for the employees and their families, but the economic sector in its whole has to bring up the funds to make everybody in the community make ends meet and have the money for their basic needs. And then on top, I have the money for the labor that I provide at a certain company. And so this paradigm shift is a very, very strong one. And to find out how this paradigm shift works, it's also a question of fine-tuning. So how high should the basic income be to have the sweet spot between the responsibility of the whole economic sector as a whole to provide money by taxes for everybody in the country, let's say, or in the community, and how much money will be still handed out as a premium for the labor that you provide as the money you get for a certain job. And also, how high should the taxes be? So for every, let's say, when I contribute my labor to the economic sector, I always produce something. I create some value. So how much of this value should be my personal gain, so I get rewarded because I create some value, and how much of this value should go out into the community to provide for the expenses of the community and also for the basic income for everybody around me. So there's a shift from the family perspective that some breadwinner earns the money for themselves and the family around them, but it's more like we as a community create values that are distributed by the basic income to everybody and by salaries to the people who work at certain companies. And there's a lot of fine-tuning to be done, and for sure we can do micro simulations, we can simulate, but in the end, it's interesting. Is there a sweet spot where we can say if the basic income is too less, then the effects that we are looking for are not reached? But if the basic income reaches a certain level, then these effects are seen, and we don't have to put the basic income higher than a certain point. So, and certainly this also, and this is my last sentence, depends on which goals do you want to achieve. So what's the policy behind it? What do you want? Do we want to just end poverty, or do we want to enable people to have a life of free choices? And perhaps the question, the answer to that question is different. How much money do you have to provide as a basic income to reach certain levels of autonomy and freedom? But these are questions that are interesting to us. And I think if we hand out 2 or 3 different levels of basic income, we can find out more about the answers to those questions.
Thank you very much. You already talked, you want to add?
Yeah, I think there's another point where we can win money from the finance, because you said like it's from the economic sector, but it's also, I think, the bureaucracy and the administration by the state that costs a lot, especially for social welfare. So if we have a universal basic income, you could reduce that cost and use the money from that you save there for the universal basic income or for other things, for example, promoting culture.
Actually, I also wanted to maybe direct the next question to you as well, Oscar, because Joy talked a lot about the policy making and kind of like what we actually want to do with the results that we actually have in the pilots. And one of the questions from the audience was also kind of what do we actually need, what actually needs to take place for actually at the end having like a real universal basic income established, kind of like what else does it need? Because we all know about the international pilots that were successful, that took place before, but we still don't have a universal basic income in any of these countries where the pilots took place. So maybe we can also take around and look at what else do we need politically to actually then get from the pilots to an actual policy being established.
I think one of the most important things are evidence in the country, what you said, like it's like in other countries it didn't happen. So I think it's like a parliament that is willing to think a bit bigger and forward and has a vision for a new social welfare state or like social programs for because we're making many steps in like improving it or then making steps backwards. So I think we need parties or also NGOs to promote that kind of UBI.
There are some more questions coming in. I think there's also a raised hand. Maybe we can have one. I don't see. I think it's Beata is your name. I think you raised your hand. Maybe.
Yes, thank you. I couldn't, the chat was not done. I would like to know to both of your pilot studies in Barcelona and Berlin, how are you going to integrate the homeless people, as you said in the beginning, if I really understood it, because they are not always with a certain address and how can you know how the progress is done with the money done and given to them? That would be very interesting for me. And I think the questions in the chat was, why don't we get enough subscriptions now on the list? And I think it's worth to discuss it and or to reflect on it as well. Thank you very much.
I'll just, whoever wants to start.
Thank you for your question. What we are going to do in order not to leave behind homeless people is to assess what would happen with them in the municipalities part of the project, because on the first part, the RCT, we will be randomizing households, and we don't have any other way to randomize this part of the pilot. So there will not be, we will not find a homeless people there because obviously they cannot be registered in a household. But in order to not leave them behind, we have thought about it, and on the 2 municipalities that we will saturate and we will give the UBI to everyone there, what we will do is first of all, prioritize the registration. So if you're registered in one of those municipalities, you're automatically part of the pilot. But we will open a time span in which you would be able to go to the city council or some offices that we will be putting there in order to say, well, I'm not registered here, but I actually live here. So you can maybe, we will be able maybe to talk with social services so they can confirm that this homeless person is actually living there. So that's how we are going to manage this, this group of people that maybe is left behind in some other pilots, only focusing on the individual randomization plan.
Yeah, I think the answer is quite the same for Berlin. Also, you have to admit that in a basic income pilot, there's one conditionality why it's not completely unconditional, and that is that you have to be ready to answer questions and to fill out a survey, because else it wouldn't be a scientific pilot if we wouldn't get any results at the end. And so also people who don't have a certain home in that area but live there, or their home is on the streets, also have to be ready to answer the surveys. And also to the second aspect of the, I think you mean the signatures for the Berlin pilot. It's unfortunately we only have like 4 weeks left, and we are lacking, let's say, 3/4 of the signatures. We are still lacking approximately 160,000 signatures to get the proposal forwarded to a people's vote. So we're really not sure if we will make it. What is important to point out is that the problem is not that there are not enough people who want to sign. We have to get signatures of 7% of the population, and way more than 7% of the Berlin population are ready to sign for that. But we don't have enough people who collect the signatures on the street. So what we hear a lot is, I want to sign it, but in the last 12 weeks, I never saw someone of your signature collectors. I'm totally ready to give you my signatures, but I didn't find a spot. So, and not everybody is serving the website and looking up a spot, because there are hundreds of places all over Berlin where the signatures are collected, but a lot of people are just trying to find someone on the street with a signature list and giving the signature. So we are hoping that we still will have enough signatures collecting people in the next 4 weeks. We need approximately 300 people who go out once or more per week in the next 4 weeks to collect signatures to have to achieve this goal. And also because we think that basic income is challenging the question of work for the community. We offered now everybody who collects signatures in Germany called Ehrenamtspauschale, so a little salary, let's say in English, of 42 euros per signature collection shift, because we think that basic income should cover your basic need, but when you do some work, you also should be rewarded for that. And we really hope we now put the call out for everybody in Berlin and also across the borders of Berlin. If you want to collect signatures and if you have some free time for that, please raise your hand, come to our website, get onboarded, get the material, go out on the streets. And if we manage to be 300 more signatures collecting people in the next week, then we have a fair shot of winning this plebiscite.
Cool. Thank you. I think we're nearly at the end of our talk. Maybe the last question I want to give to you, Bernhard Neumerker, because what both projects have in common is as well that it's on the state level and not on the national level. And maybe the question would be kind of what are the advantages to actually go on state level and not on national level, and what can these two projects actually add to actually the national policy making?
Yeah, I think one thing Troy mentioned is very important. This is to organize common sense, as he said it, yes, that we are thinking about it not only as an individual, that's very well understood and so on, but also this common good argument of the basic income and of supporting other common goods and voluntary activities, yeah, with the basic income issue. And for that, I would say starting with a group of persons who is, say, in a geographic homogeneous part of Germany or Spain and so on, is a good thing to start with, because you can also think about meetings and things, activities and so on and so forth. So therefore the urban level and the regional level is very important to start these issues, yeah, because in the federal level, you know, I do not know exactly how Spain sees it, but you have differences in cultures between the northwestern part and the southeastern part, yes. And some parts want to become autonomous. We know that others think that they are better than others. And to find that common sense is not so easy. That's a good thing to start with small entities. I think it's very important. The second thing is that on the state or even the municipal level, it's very important. And that would be my advice, because you said it will, the project will go on for 2 years or 3 years or so on, that you start immediately to think about, yes, a prolongation of the project. There was one question, how to transfer these projects towards a real basic income implementation. Therefore, it's very important on the Catalonian side, for example, that you started with, as you said, politicians who support you, yeah, to ask them and the citizens, yes, what is the driver to make it, say, a long-term project, and what are the main steps, the main sequences to implement it, yes? Not to say, okay, after 3 years, we have our results, very well, we show it, and all the other ones said, oh, perfect, but we do not know how to implement it, yeah? To develop an implementation strategy on a parallel line. I think that would be really new, that you have this long-term perspective, even for the 2-year project or the 3-year project, always in your head, that you can convince individuals also for that. We will take care about that to make it a long-term project. And that's the last argument. If you start on the community level, you can convince, for example, communities around it. Yeah, say Berlin can convince Hamburg or convince Potsdam to add the movement, to be added to the movement. Yeah, you can expand, just like the European Union. That would be very good. Yeah, to develop there a certain, say, political or bottom-up strategies, not to make it one experiment, just like in Finland, and then politicians and all the others said, okay, these are the results, very good or not so good, and then we wait for the next pilot. Yeah, this would be, I think, a very demanding thing, but a very important thing to have a long-term political implementation strategy. If you could develop it, and I think in a network of pilots, you could develop it together. Yeah, for example, in Europe, yeah, over the European chain and or in national chains, that this would be very promising. So therefore, starting on the municipal level, on the urban level, on the community level is a very good thing. Yeah, because the national level will be too demanding concerning the hurdles which overlap other aspects of individuals who are interested in basic income, but who receive always the story, for implementing basic income, we have to stop school support, or we have to stop this, yeah, and then you always have a trade-off. In a small community with the communal sense, with commoning on the argument, you can find a common pool of interests on it, and that's very important, I guess.
Thank you very much. I think that counts as final remarks from Neumark already. Maybe we just conclude our event today with final remarks of you. Maybe you want to add kind of a personal note, what you expect from the pilots, what you're most interested in, or if you want to say something else, it's also fine. Maybe we just do the round. Start, Aida. Any final comments?
Yeah, obviously from the office, we are really excited to be able and be so lucky to implement a pilot plan that it's so challenging and it's so big in Europe. And we expect it to be positive, as in having results to analyze, and maybe these results at the beginning, they don't need to maybe materialize in a policy directly, but because we always depend on the political interests and what they vote or what they do not vote. But at least we will be happy to prove what happens when the UBI is implemented. And that's a nice result that at least politicians in the future or policymakers will be able to decide having evidence provided by the pilot plan.
I'm convinced that the topic that we talk is really important, and I think it should be evaluated also on the European level, because like what we see, we have that in Berlin, we have that in Barcelona, so it does not stop on a border, so it's like a European problem and a global problem, so we should also fix it together.
Yeah, my personal wish is that we succeed in filing 175,000 signatures in 4 weeks' time here in Berlin, so that the hero journey can go on. As I said earlier, we need to put this this effort on 300 shoulders of people who go signature collecting at least once a week. We already have feedback of 210 people who raised their hand and say, I will be part of this team. I will be part of these 300 hero collecting people. And we are still short of 90 people who raised their hand and say, I will be part of this team. I will go on the streets of Berlin at least once a week in the next 4 weeks. And I'm really hoping that perhaps also someone from the audience or some friends of the audience will jump on this project now in the last 3 and 4 weeks. So I really invite everybody, please let us have this work completed. It's a big, big opportunity for Berlin, for Europe, and for scientific research around basic income. It would be very, very sad if we fail on achieving this goal. And if you have some free time in the next 4 weeks, or if you know someone who could contribute several hours in the next 4 weeks, please send them to the webpage, have them sign out the little survey that we link there, and be on the streets in the next weeks of August and the first week of September. And on the 5th of September, we will all learn if the process in Berlin will go on and if we succeeded.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. I think it was very kind of inspiring and giving hope to kind of like have a sister project joining us here in this very crucial phase of our campaign. As Joy just pointed out, it's going to be very, if we succeed, it's going to be a hero story of a lot of people who actually joined in and made this possible. And I think it's a good sign to actually see that there's a project going on in Barcelona, that you actually have very similar thoughts on kind of like what we want to research on universal basic income, what are the aspects that are still kind of missing in the picture, how we actually want to inform the policy making that should go on, and like that we all agree on that should go on, and how we can add actually to this conversation. And yeah, I think it's very promising, and it's very, we're very happy that we could host you here today, and that our 2 other guests could be here today as well. And thank you very much for your questions and your participation. And all have a good evening. That was it for today.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Yeah, Laura, thank you very much for the organization. Perfect.